Hello and welcome to episode 9 from the Irish Skies pod. This episode is called Shortcut to Santry via Heathrow. The title comes from a front page headline on the Sunday Independent of 28th of August 1983. And so on that Friday night, Neil Fogarty was just coming on 18, went for a night out which would lead him to the Boot Inn and Jets, and an unexpected ending.
Hiya, I'm Fiona Fogarty, and my youngest brother Neil, also known as Edward, which is his real name, was I think he actually was the very first person to become a stowaway on a plane in Ireland. He had gone out for a night. He was full of the joy, so he was a lovely lad, and he just went out for the night, and he had a skinful, let's put it that way. Then again, he was very young, and he wouldn't have been drinking long anyway. So I'm hoping that was the reason why he got so drunk. He had gone to Boot Inn, which is the Jets nightclub as it was at the time. A lot of us went there from here. But apparently anyway, he went to come home and couldn't get a taxi. He took off from the Jets nightclub, walking to get home. Absolutely, there was nothing around it. Absolutely nothing for miles, and that's what I'm saying, he thought he would walk home, so clearly well drunk, thinking he'd walk home from Jets. Nobody walked home from Jets, It's quite rural, and it's definitely isolated, so him getting a lift or anything was going to be impossible, And at some point he fell, and he said he rolled, and he picked himself up, and he said he saw this tarmac, so he started walking along it, and he said one thing that was puzzling was, where were the houses on the Swords Road? He had himself convinced he was on the Swords Road. And he's walking along this tarmac. I just didn't understand why everything was upside down, or just not right. Anyway, he's seen a big box. This is the way he put it. He's seen a big box, he said, and I was so tired, I climbed into it. And he woke up in Heathrow Airport the next morning, right? Because he was actually loaded onto a plane.
Dublin Airport nowadays, as illustrated on the current map, is a completely different beast to what it was in 1983. This year, Dublin will reach its capped level of 32 million passengers and will have about 245,000 flights landing and departing simultaneously on the parallel east-west runways. As we transition from 2024 to 1983, we can see the footprint of the airport decreasing and the old A-shaped layout of the old runways emerging. Runway 1129 was used by light aircraft. Runway 0624 was the main runway running southwest to northeast in the prevailing winds, and runway 1735, which still exists today, provided for movements when the wind was from the north or the south. Dublin Airport in 1983 handled about 2.5 million passengers and 90,000 movements, a far cry from today's numbers, as depicted in this famous photograph of Mary Ryan hanging out her washing in the cottages where the southern runway 1028 was constructed in 1988-89. The layout of the airport was similar to today, with the ramp area extending southeast away from the original terminal and tower, with the A and B pier buildings for passenger flights. The hangars to the northeastern corner, the cargo ramp towards the Swords Road, Fiona on the western side of the airport near the current tower and SAR hangar, and the Boot Inn and Jets nightclub alongside. Here the 41B is dropping passengers and the set-down parking is allowed on the roadway in front of the terminal. There is no Terminal 2, no multi-storey car park, and the old Aer Lingus head office block is clearly visible.
Well, hi, my name is Pat Campbell, and I spent 32 years as a pilot in Aer Lingus. I was the first officer on this particular flight on the 27th of August 1983. This was the early morning cargo flight from Dublin to London Heathrow, Shamrock 9160. The assigned aircraft was Alpha Sierra Charlie. This was one of Aer Lingus's 4 QC aircraft, QC meaning quick change. Quick change aircraft had 3 possible configurations: all passenger, all cargo, or a mixed configuration of 2 pallet of cargo and 74 passengers. So we had an all-freighter configuration on this particular morning. So only 2 crew on board. Myself and Captain Ken Glynn were scheduled for this particular flight. We reported at 4:30 a.m. and the flight was due to depart at 5:15 and due to arrive in London just after 6 a.m. Dublin Airport was very quiet in those days. We had the ops room to ourselves. We would have prepared our flight plan and then gone out to the aircraft, probably arriving at the aircraft at approximately 4:50. So that gave us about 25 minutes for our pre-flight checks, which would have included an exterior inspection of the aircraft, And around about this time, either loading would already have concluded or it would be in the final stages. The loading was generally 7 pallets on the upper deck and some other cargo, loose cargo generally, in the lower holds. The pallets would have been packed at the cargo terminal and either brought across the airplane if it was on one of the passenger stands having arrived in there the previous night, or perhaps the aircraft might have been parked on the cargo apron. But the pallets or the igloos would have been packed first of all and then brought to the aircraft for loading. So coming up to departure time, we would have received our final paperwork, so the load sheet and confirmation that everything had been loaded securely and checked, and we would have then been on our way. It being a Saturday morning and very few movements, if any, at Dublin Airport, we would have had a short taxi to the departure runway and would have been on our way. My flight log shows a sector time of 55 minutes. This being the weekend, the Wales training area was generally closed, so we would normally have expected a shortcut, a routing sometimes short of Wallasey towards Honnelly VOR. And I think that's reflected in the 45 minutes flight time we would have had across on this particular day. Would have arrived on our stand. The crews would have been waiting for us there. My job would have been to, once we'd finished our checks in the cockpit, to go back and open the forward entry door, drop the air stairs, which would have allowed others to come on board then. Then the main cargo door would have been opened and the loading crew would have commenced the job of taking off the 7 pallets. So at that point, my job was done for the moment. Went back to the cockpit and I was sitting there with the captain maybe 5 minutes later when the door opened. A loader walked in, probably the supervisor on the day, and quietly said, "Captain, I think there's something you need to see here." So we both jumped up, of course, and followed him back. At this point, 2 or 3 pallets, I can't remember whether it was 2 or 3, but 2 or 3, I would say, had been taken off. And we were now down to the next one to come off. Somebody had noticed a strange smell coming from this particular pallet and had lifted the tarpaulin, as I remember, and looked in and saw what they believed to be a body lying on top of the freight inside the pallet.
When the plane landed over there and it was seen that there was somebody in that box after it was taken out, and what they decided was they were terrified they were dealing with a body. So what they done was they decided to get a forklift to shake the box. And that happened 3 or 4 times. There was no move. There was a young police person over in England. They were obviously very young, had come. And at this stage, the poor old police person was really in bits. They were really scared. They genuinely thought they had a body. And then finally, he actually moved. And of course, it was great relief for all around. But the thing about this was, at the time, we had the Troubles in the north. So this was seen as a huge security breach. So, of course, the big hee-ho over the whole thing, like as you can imagine.
We called out, tried to establish what the situation was. There was no response, no apparent movement. And the captain at that stage quite rightly said, ordered that nobody touch anything. We didn't really know what we were dealing with, and that an ambulance and the police should be called straight away. So that was done. I suppose we waited maybe 5 minutes for the emergency services to arrive. They fairly quickly established that we didn't have a body on our hands, at least, that there were signs of life. And after some time, eventually roused what we now knew to be a young man from what was quite obviously a very, very deep sleep. He was very dishevelled, he was disorientated, he appeared to be overwhelmed. No, he wasn't capable of climbing out, I don't think. So that's why I suspect in my own mind that the pallet was probably taken off with him in it or on it, because he was, while he was on the ramp, he was still in this prone position, shall we say, while he was being questioned. He was rather like, so he was looking up at the police constable who was leaning over him, questioning him. So he clearly wasn't in a position to stand up at that stage, I would think. I have a memory of him being questioned by a young police officer. She's a woman police officer, and standing behind her were 2 male colleagues. And she was asking him some very basic questions along the lines of, what is your name? Do you know where you are? And so on. And I'm sure he knew what his name was, but he certainly had no idea where he was, and certainly no idea how he got there. So I'd imagine he was just totally overwhelmed by the scene, sitting on a ramp in a strange country. He didn't know what country he was in, never mind what airport he was in. That was it. He gradually came around to the extent that I think they were able to establish there was no inherent threat here. There was no malevolence, no malice involved, and it was probably just something rather silly that had happened, that he'd ended up on the flight, you know. So the last I remember of the young man was he was being led towards a police car and been taken away to the local station for just some further questioning. I suppose the police needed to satisfy themselves as to exactly what they were dealing with. Brief statements were taken from the captain, myself and the loading crew. We were allowed to carry on with our loading of the aircraft for the return flight. When we got back to Dublin, Captain Glynn would have raised an incident signal because it was a fairly serious incident, I suppose. And he'd also filed an internal captain special report on the event.
So that morning, we're all in bed, no problem to us. And the next thing, the door was hammered. This is the Gardaí. And if anybody remembers the Gardaí back then, they nearly took the doors off the hinges. So bang, 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 and it woke me because my bedroom's just above the door. And of course, it woke my mother, who was on a day off. My mother worked in Aer Lingus for Aer Lingus, and she stuck her head out the window. "What do you want?" And this figure moved back from the door and said, "Have you got a son called Edward, Mrs.?" And of course, Mammy went, "Of course I did, of course I did. What's wrong with him? What's wrong with him?" Now, she immediately thought she was going to be told something dreadful. And she was getting all upset. And he said, "Nothing, Mrs. Sure, he's in Heathrow." And she's looking, Heathrow? Heathrow? What's he doing in Heathrow? I'll give him Heathrow. So the guard asked if she could come down to talk to us. You know, he wanted to talk to any members of the family. So, "You'll have to wait till I'm decent. I'll be down in a minute." And she popped her head back in. She got us all up and we all got dressed and came down. And she was down here. We made her a cup of tea because she needed it badly. And she's sitting there and the guard is explaining to us that what had happened was my brother had ended up in the hold of a plane and ended up in Heathrow Airport, and he had been very drunk. But he was fine. But he did say that they gave him a really good breakfast. They were really polite and they were very kind to him. And when they had finished with the questions and they had explained to him about the terrorism thing and that's why they had been questioning him, and that they were quite convinced that he wasn't a terrorist or that, and he said no. And he said when he was going to leave, they told him that like he would be getting on the next plane to Dublin, and they brought him out and put him on the plane. He was escorted onto the plane. They also explained that when he did come home, he wouldn't be coming straight to the family home. He would be being brought out in a police car, and they would go around the perimeter of the airport. What they wanted to do is they were hoping that he'd be able to point out exactly where he fell and how he ended up on the runway, because it was seen as a breach of security for terrorism. Imagine. But anyway, they were at this stage convinced he wasn't a terrorist. A terror maybe, but not a terrorist.
My very first thought was that Neil had somehow got onto the Iona ramp and crossed the airfield. However, at this stage I would eliminate Iona as a point of access for the following reasons. With the layout of the airport, Neil could have accessed runway 17 from the Iona ramp and taxiway. However, this would leave an individual in a highly intoxicated state to walk along runway 17, across runway 24, and then walk across the ramp from the A to the B piers and beyond to the cargo ramp undetected to where the igloos were packed.
The pallets would have been packed at the cargo terminal and then brought to the aircraft for loading.
Secondly, at Iona, as can be seen here, there was a large security gate attached to the Iona clubhouse. And if he tried to access the Iona ramp from an adjacent field, there was 7 to 8 foot footing all around the airfield, which in his condition he would not have been able to climb. Thirdly, Fiona recalls that Neil was adamant that he had been walking home along the road and convinced both the British and Irish police of this.
He set off on the road. One thing that was clear with him, that he fell and he rolled. And that would be confirmed by the fact that the guards brought him around several times trying to find where he fell and got under the thing.
So the next option available to Neil was, upon leaving the Jets car park, to turn north towards the Knoll and then turn right at the 17 threshold towards Forest Little. Near the runway 24 threshold was the only place on the airfield where I remember there being low fencing, as illustrated in this photograph. However, Neil would have had to scramble up the embankment to the low fence, get across the fence and then up a further embankment to the 2-4 threshold, across the entire ramp, from the hangars, past the fire station and their watch room, past the tower, and then again past the A and the B pier buildings to the cargo ramp. Additionally, as can be seen in the background of these photos, everywhere else in this area had the usual 7 to 8 foot fencing topped with barbed wire around it, and so it's highly unlikely that the breach occurred here, and so I'm eliminating the 2-4 threshold. Neil's last option was to turn south towards the Ballymun Road, and then along Collinstown Lane, past where the current mound is, and towards the road to Santry. Along this road to the east of the runway 35 threshold, there's a U-bend in the road that warrants examination. The dashed line indicates the old roadway into the airport before the original B pier building was built and the cargo ramp was expanded. Many of us of a particular age may remember the line of Aer Lingus Viscounts that were parked in this area awaiting sale or scrapping. At the top of the U-bend was this security gate, which as seen from the pictures shows how close the public road was to the cargo ramp. The pictures of the US Air Force aircraft were taken in 1984 when President Reagan was visiting Ireland, and the picture of the Japan Airlines aircraft was taken in 1985 when Crown Prince Akihito was on his state visit. What can also be seen is the concreted roadway, i.e. the old airport road, running from this security gate towards the cargo ramp. Did Neil fall into the hedge ditch alongside the security gate? Did the security fence reach to the bottom of the ditch? And if not, did Neil emerge on the air side of the fence as he came out of the ditch? And is this old roadway the tarmac that Neil saw after he took his tumble? The Air Tourist CL44 is a regular on the cargo ramp, and in the zoomed in picture we can see a number of cargo igloos along the edge of the ramp. What we can also see is that apart from the security gate, is that the standard 7 to 8 foot fencing is in place right along the boundary. These photos of the Caravel and 737 shows the fencing right along Collinstown Lane near the mound, and also on the northern side of the runway 35 threshold back towards the cottages. In the photo of Mrs. Ryan, the fencing seems very low and broken down. However, when we zoom into the background, we can see the concrete posts for the 7 to 8 foot fencing around the boundary. A source who was based in Santry Garda Station at the time recalls a lot of concern within the detective unit in the aftermath of this event, as it was felt that airport security had been breached along Collinstown Lane. And so in my opinion, the hedge ditch beside the security gate is most likely the place that Neil inadvertently breached the airport security fence, walked along the old airport road, and for a rest climbed into a cargo igloo that had been packed and was awaiting transfer over to the Shamrock 9160 bound for Heathrow that Saturday morning, with Neil blissfully unaware and asleep inside.
They did ask us not to, under any circumstances, talk to the press. It was very funny. None of our neighbours spoke to the press either. Nobody knew who Edward actually was. My brother never went by his real name, Edward. He worked in the Swiss cottage, and the press had gone in there looking for him, and they all went, no. None of the customers, regular customers, knew an Edward. Nobody knew Edward because he was known as Neil. Now, I know that the Swiss cottage had been rung as well in between, to be told. So they hadn't just rang the police, they rang the Swiss, which I believe probably was because he was meant to be in work, and he probably got them to ring his job to explain why he wasn't in work. To be honest with you, they just thought it was hilarious, absolutely hilarious, and it had to be the best excuse anyone has ever given for not being in work. I'm sorry I couldn't come into work today because I'm in Heathrow. I was a stowaway on a plane. Yeah, well, Mammy was very good for going up in the air, you know, she could reach the rafters very fast, especially when she thought anything was wrong with any of us, like any Irish mammy, really, like any mother. You could see it in her all day long. She was what she called mithered. She had the kettle on constant, and she was constantly drinking tea and muttering, Heathrow. She wasn't even saying Heathrow, which is what she'd normally say. She was going, Heathrow, like the way the guard had said it to her. She kind of picked up his accent, Heathrow, I'll give him Heathrow. You know, it was funny listening to her, but at the same time it was kind of worrying as well, because she kept her up all day, like until she actually saw her son. We're listening to this, I'll kill him when I get him here. I'll give him Heathrow. And, oh, me baby, are you all right, son? What can I do for you, son? Do you need to sleep now, son? I think it'd be best now if you went to your bed, love, and we'll get you up tomorrow morning. You'll be fine, and Mammy will have a lovely breakfast. Mammy will have a lovely breakfast for you. that's what he got when he got home.
Now, unfortunately, poor Neil is unable to tell the story himself,
Yeah.
and that he died young
He was 39 when he died. Yeah, very young. He left behind a lovely wife and 4 beautiful children. So that's kind of very sad for me to think about him. And I often wonder what he'd look like now, because he'd have been 60 now. But I look at his children and, they're lovely. They really are. And his lovely wife, and he would have had a lot to be proud of, which is important as well. But they don't know the story as far as I'm aware. So that's why I'm doing this, is so that they will know it and that their children will know it, because they do have children. He would have been a grandfather. His one and only daughter has twins, and another one of his sons has a lovely little girl as well. His daughter has a boy and a girl. And he'd have been so thrilled with those children. And he would have been very, very proud of his own kids as well. His wife done a great job of rearing them. And as the baby, of course, he was idolised by us all. We all loved him, with the exception of Damien when they were young. But when they grew up, they were very close when they grew up, Sad to say neither of them are here now.
I think in hindsight, this was an amusing incident, but clearly at the time it could have been very serious. We were at the height of the Troubles. Somebody had managed to get themselves on board an airplane which was heading for London. So you can imagine, a different fork in the road. Things might have been very much more serious. When I look back on my career, I suppose this is one of the ones that I put into the amusing at the time category.
It does say a lot for the time. I think it also says a lot for the guards and the police at the time as well, and how well they worked with each other on different things. And not just that, but also how they were able to assess people. Guards are dealing, and policemen in England, I'm sure, they're all dealing with criminal entities every day. They get to know who's a spoofer and who isn't. And I'm sure that had a part to play in it as well, their own assessment skills. But he was a very tall man, my younger brother. He was very tall, and he was quite a handsome man. But there was an air of innocence about him, and he was a very likeable character, which wouldn't have hurt at all. So he had that kind of, personality that kind of gets away with a lot. He was just charming. It's very hard. I try to picture what he might be like now, and I can't. But I'm happy enough to keep him as he was, forever young.